Factors of productivity, land, labor, shackled in the states. Power sector reforms also stalled in the states. We talk about privatization in the center, but we don't talk about privatization in the states. I mean, there isn't a single state where the PSUs make more money than they lose. So, and the ruling dispensation now, NDA, is in power in at least 18 states.
Yeah, so
now you've been in Niti Aayog, which looks at the states and all. I'm not criticizing. This government has done certain things spectacularly. The Jan Dhan Yojana, the financialization of savings, the rural electrification program. I'm a bit iffy about the Jal Jeevan thing, and we can come to that later. But why isn't even the ruling party states not accepting reforms that are being propagated by the center?
No, I think it's very important what you've done, and which is that we have to shift the conversation away from Delhi. Because states is where the rubber meets the road. States is where action is going to be and is. And Niti Aayog, actually, one of the principal mandates which we are now pushing very hard is to engage with the states. In fact, what we are trying to do is that for each state in India, we are trying to encourage them to develop their own blueprints for growth and development, because every state is so different. I mean, there's nothing common between Manipur and Gujarat, or between J&K and Tamil Nadu. And we just recently brought out what was called the Export Preparedness Index, and we divided the states between coastal states and landlocked states, and there are some states like the Punjab which are double landlocked, etc. You can't have an EXIM policy pan-India, which is what we've done for the last 70 years. And therefore, what we are trying to do now is for every state to try and develop its own, export policy, appoint export commissioners, and so on. So that you're absolutely right. But this is changing. And this is changing because of what we call competitive federalism, which Niti Aayog is pushing in sense of bringing out indices. And we now brought out about 11 of them, where we rank the states and put them out in the public domain. And we try and encourage them to compete with each other, to show that, look, this is what you, now this includes, your health index, this includes the export preparedness, the innovation index, the school education, etc. So all of those reforms have to be done there. But what are the instruments of encouraging the states and engaging them? That's what we need to think through, because each, the constitutional, the situation is that every state, all those are state subjects, and they would like to do that. Now, you will recall that on the 15th of August, the Honorable Prime Minister, I haven't heard anybody else say that, talked about regulatory and compliance burden in this country. 67,000 of them. And all of them, the great majority of them, are there in the states. And now Niti Aayog is engaging with each state, and some of them, I lead the effort to say that, look, let's drop a list. And drop a list to say how we make private investment, private business, entrepreneurship more viable, more feasible, and how does the sort of obstructionist part of the government gets out of the way and cedes the space, to that. Now, whether the states will privatize their PSUs is an open question, because not many have done it, but at least the government of India has now set an amazing example by finally clinching Air India, by announcing that 2 of the public sector banks will be privatized. They've announced that, and the process is ongoing. And by talking about the IPO for LIC, etc. So, you remember the time when, and I was in the government then, and when Montek was my boss, when privatization was not a word to be used in India. We coined a word called disinvestment, and the Department of Disinvestment was created. But at least now that's happening. So the entire the environment, the ecosystem is changing. But the other big thing, Shankar, is that we've also not ever before emphasized accountability and delivery of public services and their accountability there, and improved governance. Now here, for example, we are taking, and you would notice that 400 schemes now, more than 400, the benefits are transferred directly to the beneficiaries, and not through intermediaries. And because of the jam trinity that's now being used, Moreover, the development, we have a monitoring and evaluation office in Niti Aayog, which actually monitors all the 370 central sponsored schemes, and evaluates them on outputs and and outcomes, and not on the outlays that you're making. That will change, and that is changing, beginning to change the governance, the governance function. And that's, by the way, the key. And that is, we are trying to take it to the states, and it will take time. But nonetheless, I think if you talk about Gujarat, or if you talk about UP now, or you talk about, or Himachal, or Haryana, these states, which are the ruling party states, are following the central government's lead in taking the reforms that they should be taking. And I think have accepted the fact that they will cede the space and they will use the government machinery to facilitate and promote private investment and not talk about commanding heights, etc., etc. So that much is clear now. There's a consensus, I think, across the states that it is the private sector, it is the private investor which will be the driver for growth in India, and the government and the corporate sector, the private corporate sector, have to work hand in hand to drive the engine forward.
Yeah, ideas of India.